I had a child molest case where we had a girl of 16 came in to report that she had been abused by her father for the last decade. And she was the only one, the only evidence we had, and it was her word, and that was it. And generally, that's not enough from where I am to prove these types of things happen. Well, what we found was that years ago, the systems that monitored, criminal activity weren't communicating with each other. So in 1983, this perpetrator had been arrested and released on a child molest charge. And then in 1986, the family court was involved in taking his child away during divorce proceedings for sexual abuse allegations. But the family court didn't link with the criminal court, so there was no connection between those two, and he was never investigated for that case. In the year 2000, nobody in law enforcement even knew about the child that had been taken during the divorce. So when my victim reports in 2014 that all of this had been going on, that's all we had. But because of my education and my training and my expertise in child abuse cases, I knew there was more, because the conduct that was described by Elizabeth was egregious and started off egregious. And from what I knew from talking to experts in that field is that generally the conduct doesn't start that way. So I said, you know what, I needed a team, and I made a team of my investigator and myself and my paralegal. And we figured out that there was a backstory to this man. And by asking the right questions and understanding how that crime works, I was able to ask the right questions. And I found that he had been divorced. We didn't know that before. And so I went and pulled the divorce records, and I found that his child had been removed. And I said, okay, now we have a case. And it was 30 years prior to today that this abuse had happened. And so with the connection of law enforcement in another state, we located that person. And because in our jurisdiction we're allowed to put on evidence in these types of cases of prior allegations, I made a trip across state lines to Nevada, and I met her, and I convinced her to come to San Diego to help me prove this case and to meet her sister that she never knew she had. And so because of the way the laws are written, but also because we approached this from a team point of view, we were able to sort of solve this case. This case on its own came across another attorney's desk before it came to me. And that attorney did not file charges on this case because they did not understand and they did not have the education that I had to figure out how to look into this background. And now that man is serving over 200 years to life in prison because we approach this from the right point of view. Physical abuse cases, oftentimes you're looking at school records, social services records, friends, neighbors, doctor's visits. In the way we are, when children go for well child visits, very, very much is documented, even though they're not going in for any illness or injury. But the doctors document important things like height and weight, and they track it. And I want to talk to you about the importance of that in a case that I had, and it's Daniel's case. Daniel was the victim, and when he was 8, almost 9, he was discovered, he was rescued by a relative in awful conditions. And he told his tale of horrifying abuse. It was just, it was awful. But it was so awful that it was almost hard to believe, because none of us had ever had a case like this, where the kinds of allegations that he was making were just hurt your heart so much that you could not wrap your brain around it. But he was the only one to tell the story. He had no backup. There was no corroboration. And no one had seen what happened, but even if they had seen pieces of it, they had largely ignored it. And so this is another example of where the team didn't exist and I built it. And so it was me and my investigator and my medical staff and the medical team, not my staff, and the social workers. And everybody brought something to the table. And because we were able to share that information directly, we were able to prosecute this case. The initial investigation by the police department honestly was not as thorough as it should have been. And so that's when our office took over. And we started going through the documentation and outside sources. Let me go back. And this was a case where Daniel was being physically abused and also being starved, and probably would have died had he not been rescued. And one of the critical pieces of evidence in proving this case was the evidence from his well child visits. Because we generated a chart, the growth chart, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, where I plotted the points on the growth chart as to where he was, totally normal. And then when he said the deprivation of food started, you could see with your eyes how low the growth chart went. He fell off the growth chart because he wasn't being given food. And it was a piece of evidence that was cobbled together by using the medical doctor and his statements from the police and my interviews with him, because I had been educated enough in this area to ask the right questions. And thankfully, the criminals who perpetrated these awful crimes against him are also in prison. With sexual abuse cases, there are often grooming behavior patterns, and we look to that. We look to the siblings and other victims. We look at digital evidence. We talk about asking the right questions. I had a case where a little girl, and she was 7 years old, she had alleged that her stepfather was sexually abusing her in very awful ways. Well, it was also very difficult to prove, because she said this happened and he said it did not happen. And so because the police were, in this case, well trained in how these crimes work, and they understood the nature of child sexual abuse, they were able to conduct an investigation that was thorough, which included seizing videotapes and other digital evidence that didn't necessarily seem connected to the case at the time. But knowing what we know about these cases, we started pouring through that digital evidence. And we found some things in the digital evidence that concerned us. This was a person who owned a gym, and he was a bodybuilder. And he often videotaped himself working out at the gym and then doing other things at the gym that led us to believe that the gym had a sexual connection to it for him that it shouldn't have. So we subpoenaed records from the gym of all of the younger female attendees and trainees. And we started going through that, and we took that and his cell phone evidence and looked at numbers that he had called often, and we linked that up to a particular girl. And when I went to interview her, I asked her all the right questions, but she was not a little girl anymore. She was a teenager and almost 18. And so she was kind of tough. You know, she had taken care of herself for a while, and she was not going to give him up. And in talking to her face to face, I noticed that she had a tattoo on the inside of her finger. And you could only really see it when she moved her hand a certain way. And it was Roman numerals. So I asked her. Because people generally will tattoo things on their bodies that mean something to them if they're doing it themselves. And I asked her what it meant. And she told me it was a date. And I said, what's the significance of that date? And it was the date that she had gone to Planned Parenthood and had an abortion of his child. So she was a young girl at the time, and he had gotten her pregnant. And because of that, we were able to get additional records, and we were able to prove that he had taken her to Planned Parenthood and picked her up. And so only because of that additional investigation were we able to successfully prosecute him for what he was doing to the little girl that lived in his home. The Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force is a prime example of using a task force to its full advantage. Now, even when you have partners in the community that will speak to each other, when you have a task force, you have a member of your team embedded in that task force, and they will know everything the other people know, and they share information. On our task force, we have local, we have state, and we have federal, as well as international members. We had a case which was a peer-to-peer, so it was one individual sharing child pornography over the internet with another individual. And it was quite a bit. So what happens is the internet service providers identified a piece of child pornography because of the digital thumbprint or fingerprint that's embedded in photographs. The way that works is you can take each photograph has actually a numerical component that relates to it. It's a very long number. But the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children keeps a database of known child pornography images and those hashtags, the numbers that associate with the photo. And so when we get a photo or a bunch of photos, it gets sent to them and they run it through their computers and they say, you know what, we've identified these 10 photos as known child pornography. We've seen this before because these pictures continue to circulate the globe. So based on that, we got some search warrants. And based on the investigators' wealth of knowledge of how child pornographers work, they were able to conduct a well-educated interview of the suspect. He ultimately gave up his phone, and on his phone he had pictures of children that didn't look like commercial child pornography. And the reason was because he was a nurse at a children's convalescent home, and he was a respiratory therapist for children who could not speak or who could not communicate in other ways. And he was molesting them and taking pictures of it. And he was trading those photos and posting those photos online. And we had asked at one point, you know, how many children, and he said, how many snowflakes are there? How many types of snowflakes are there? That's how many children he had hurt. And so it was only because of the combination of the task force's work were we able to find out that he had victims that he was putting his hands on. And obviously we put an end to that. We had an international investigation one time where England gave us a tip about some videos that had been found there. And they used the IP address or the Internet Protocol address of the person who uploaded these photographs. It traced back to San Diego. So they sent the information to San Diego, and San Diego started investigating. The case involved a father taking advantage of his child, taking videos of it, sharing it online, and there was another individual that was involved in that as well. Because of the tip from England, and because they are members of the same types of organizations, task forces that we are, we had that connection. And they were able to get us involved. And we were able to find that there were actually 9 victims locally in San Diego, and probably more elsewhere. And we never would have discovered that this child, this daughter of this man, was being victimized because she would never tell. And she never did, in fact. But we were successful in prosecuting because we had global partners that we were on the same page with and had the same mindset of prosecuting these cases. We had another case, this was one of mine, where a 6 and 11-year-old were taken to a hotel by their babysitter. And that was videotaped, and those videos were traded online. Well, the IP address, again, traced back to San Diego, and it gets forwarded to our specialized task force. Well, there was one agent who was very determined to figure out who this was, because we had no clues. It was just a motel. But we analyzed the video over and over again, and there was a phone in the motel. And they were able to zoom in enough to get the name of the hotel off of the phone. And from there, the investigation continued. And we got involved, my office got involved in order to get search warrants for the motel's records. And they found these people use their own names because they're not really that as smart as they think they are. And so they investigated it, records, we identified the defendants. We sent them to prison. Well, 3 years later, some more videos that looked like they came from that same event surfaced online. So, in another state. So, an ICE agent, so immigrations agent, saw the video, ID'd the defendants, recognized it, because we collaborate on these cases. It gets sent back to our office, and the same detective manages to catch this case, who immediately knows who these players are. We were able to identify additional victims based on more research and investigation, and not one of those victims testified, but we proved that case anyway, even without the children testifying, because we had done the legwork and we obtained the evidence because we worked together. This was another one of my cases where the federal government was investigating a guy for uploading child pornography online, and they had gotten some search warrants that they served at his house. Well, when they got there, they found him asleep in bed with his child. Nothing was happening, and everybody denied that anything had happened between them. But obviously, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand, because I'm hearing about it during our meeting at the task force. I said, there's no way this guy didn't touch this girl based on what I know about, this kind of crime. Well, the feds took the case and they just prosecuted him for the child pornography, the distribution of it. But still, it didn't sit well with me. So I started talking to the defendant's wife, because she was a witness. She was there when the search warrant happened. And because we were concerned about the daughter, we had her interviewed at our children's hospital in a forensic setting, which is a special kind of interview we conduct with children. Well, she always denied that anything happened, but the mother just didn't, based on the way we talked to her and treated her with respect, but also the fact she was part of this case as a witness, she knew we were trustworthy, and she knew she could, she also, the hair on the back of her neck kind of stood up a little bit. So she started going, she had to move from the house because he's in jail. She started going through his stuff, and she found more videos. And she trusted us enough to not look at them and to just give them to us. And she said, I don't know what's on here. I don't want to know what's on here, but can you please look into this? And so we did. And we found documentation of him having molested 2 of his nieces from a decade before. And this was another case where I prosecuted it without putting the victim on the stand. He's also serving in upward to life in prison. So I get it. These are awful cases, and really, nobody wants to necessarily hear about them. But I do think that there is something we can glean from this kind of stuff that will apply when we're dealing with crimes that cross jurisdictions or borders. And I think it's because, we've got these task forces and these multidisciplinary teams that do more than just share information. We absolutely have become partners at the table. And so when we do that, we're invested in the process. We have a common goal. We've decided that this is a crime that needs to be tackled. This is an area of the law that deserves and merits our attention. And so now we are all invested in it, and that makes a tremendous difference. that's the long-term approach. And I think that you can solve each individual crime on its own and be successful in prosecuting that individual crime. But things like human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, all of these things, they are large criminal enterprises, and they are more than just one case. There are threads that kind of weave between all of them and bind them all together. And so when we decide that this is something bigger than just one case, we dedicate ourselves to solving a problem, because that's what it is. We must educate ourselves. We need to do the research into how do these people operate? How are they successful? How have they avoided our detection for so long? You know, who are the peripheral members of the community that are allowing the criminal activity to continue? Because if we can reach these people's minds, and they're, you know, maybe we can change their minds. Maybe we can get them to understand that when we pull back the curtain of human trafficking, you know, there are real people there that are being really hurt, and maybe we can do something to save more people. We also need to educate the community. Ms. Barrett and I will often go out into the community, she more than I, and talk about human trafficking to parents, to schools. You know, social media has become an extension of our body. You will not find a 15-year-old teenage girl in San Diego without a cell phone at the end of her hand every minute of every day. Kids are glued to their cell phones. They text each other from across the table. And this is how they communicate. And so when we talk about educating ourselves, we need to learn their language. You know, if you want to learn, Mary Ellen had some slides up here that had some language that the traffickers were using that to the common person, it might make no sense. But we have to learn their language. We've got to all be working out of the same dictionary. So when we're talking about kids, that's their dictionary, is their cell phone. So let's figure that out. Social media is a tremendous driving force it has been for several years, but right now we are all well aware of social media's impact on things big and small. So we use social media to educate the public. We use their language, their dictionary, and we are trying to change their mind about what it means to be trafficked, or the fact that there is no shame in being the victim of a crime. And so we have to use these tools that they use to reach them. Community collaborations are tremendous as well. When I go out and do a presentation to parents of middle school kids, I will get no less than 5 or 6 emails or phone calls in the weeks that follow. Hey, you said something at that presentation that resonated with me. I'm worried about my daughter because something she's doing, you talked about in your lecture. And this is a parent who might have just chalked it up to her moody teenage daughter not wanting to talk to her. And it's just normal, and she'll come around. Well, something I said sparked just this kernel of, wow, that might be going on in my kid's school. And this is how we find traffickers, reaching these kids, because the parents said, you know what, I do need to look at your cell phone. I do need to look at your internet history. This is where the criminals are breeding this type of crime. That's where we need to catch it. So changing the minds of people, I think, is key. I'm happy to hear these wildlife presentations about how now they are being prosecuted, and I think that's a testament to how you all are flipping the script. The point why you're all here today is to say, you know what, this is a serious crime. This does have an impact on my community, on where I live, on where I work, on my children's future. We are all connected, and it's part of one of the other reasons why I feel so lucky to be here today, because I firmly believe that this is no longer just one country, another town. we're a global community, and we are all connected, and everything we do impacts every other one of us. And so bringing each other to the table to talk about effective strategies is, I think, a very good way to get started in seeing what works. And don't be afraid to challenge the system as you know it if you think that there's a better way to do things. Because we sometimes get stuck doing things the way we do them because it's easier. It's not always best. Challenge yourself to always keep on up to date on what works and what doesn't work, and move forward instead of staying stagnant. And I think together as a community, when all people that are impacted by these crimes become invested in solving them, I think that is the way forward, and that's the way that we are effective in investigating and prosecuting all kinds of crimes. I thank you so much for your time.
Another round of applause for her. That was a wonderful one. You know, what she said last about all of us, we are affected by each other, and the need for collaboration to learn from ourselves and the different way. Okay. And we learn from each other, because if you continue doing what you're doing the same way you have been doing them, you will not get the same result, will not get a different result. But by collaborating with one another, we learn different aspects, which is the essence of CWAG AAP, so that law officers in different jurisdictions can collaborate, law enforcement officers can collaborate in making sure that we have the society that is free of crime, which we want. So, because we want to do everything immediately and so that we can have our lunch and go, we suggested that it's better for us to have a panel discussion now, so that once we finish having the panel discussion, we can go outside for the group photo, and then after that we have our lunch and we are out of here, so that people that want to catch their flight can go ahead and do so. So for the panel discussion, I'll be inviting the following persons for the panel discussion to make the sessions richer. I'll be inviting the following persons for the panel discussion. Remember, this is the period you have to ask all your questions, because all the presenters and even people that we know are involved in answering questions that arose during the course of the presentation today are going to be part of this panel. And the people that are going to be part of the panel, we have Jesus Romero. Please, Jesus. You're welcome. Please, a round of applause as he comes. Marisa Ditilio, Mary Allen Barrett, Mr. Richard Ntumfam Efa from the National Park Service, Adedayo Memudu from the NCF. We also have the Chief Superintendent of Immigration, Taofik Adedayo Odetunde. We also have DCP Selem Amakre from the Nigerian Police, representing the IG of Police. Yes, we have made the panel to be fuller and richer, so that we'll all be able to ask all our questions that arose in the course of the different presentation, because we ensure that we have all of them present, so that all those issues will be handled. And to handle the panel discussion is none other but Chief. To moderate the panel discussion is none other than Chief Anthony Idigbe, SAN. He's a seasoned legal practitioner with over 30 years experience. Chief Anthony Idigbe is a senior partner at Punuka Attorneys and Solicitors. He was elevated to the rank of the Senior Advocate of Nigeria in 2000 and was recently admitted to practice law in Ontario, Canada. He has advised clients on several complex transactions and has represented major companies and institutions in the highest courts of Nigeria. He's a well-known capital markets legal advisor and has advised and acted as counsel to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He has also been involved as lead counsel in many big-ticket litigation briefs, such as the Kano Trovan clinical trials cases. He also possesses wealth of knowledge and experience in telecommunications law, particularly the workings of the Nigerian telecommunications industry, having represented numerous clients in various telecommunication disputes. He has extensive experience in insolvency and restructuring, and has acted as counsel to several ex-bank executives in a continuous flow of civil and criminal cases arising from the 2009 central bank intervention and restructuring in the banking sector. Chief Anthony Udigbe SNN graduated from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, in 1982, with a second-class degree. He also received the Honorable Justice Orojo Prize for the best student in company law. He finished from the Nigerian Law School, Lagos, in 1983, also with a 2-1 grade. He has 3 Masters of Law degrees from universities in the UK and Canada, as well as several other diplomas and certification from various professional organizations. And also an additional information, he's also my boss. He's the one I call boss. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Chief Anthony Udigbe SN.
Good afternoon, all of us. I believe we have had a very enriching and fruitful discussion this morning up to this afternoon. I think that we need to give another round of applause to our facilitators. The purpose of this session is to give us the opportunity to ask questions and also to drill down a little bit further on some of the discussions. So there will be a portion of the discussion where we will take questions from the participants. To kick off, some of the participants have already sent in questions, and I would try to introduce some of those questions to the panel and get their perspective. One of the issues that have come up is the challenge of multiple agencies involved with wildlife trafficking management. You have so many agencies from the presentation that has been made. You have the park services, you have the NGOs who are interested in the area as well, you have the customs, you have the police, you have immigration, you have environment, you have climate change, and so many agencies. And some of our facilitators have said that multiple agencies can become a barrier in dealing with this challenge. The suggestion has also been made that collaboration could be a solution. And some of the facilitators have given us examples of how they collaborate. So the first question is going to go to the Nigerian agencies, and is, what are the existing framework in Nigeria for collaboration amongst the multiple agencies that we also have in Nigeria that are involved with managing wildlife trafficking? I would like to start with Richard Effa from the National Park Service.
Thank you very much for that question. If we listen very carefully, I have said that one of the regulatory agencies that in charge of wildlife trafficking is the NESRA. And the Federal Minister of Environment is the umbrella body that takes charge of all these agencies. The NESRA is a parastatal in Federal Ministry of Environment, and the CITES is also domesticated in that very, is also controlled in that very ministry. So, like we have the Endangered Species Act of 2004. We have a desk officer in Federal Ministry of Environment, and the agency that is implementing this is the NESRA, also a parastatal in Federal Ministry of Environment. It may interest us to know that recently the Act on Endangered Species has been amended, and the areas of this amendment was in the area of fines. All those fines that were before the amendment of 2016, that were 1,000 naira, were all upgraded to 5 million. And those that were 500 naira were upgraded to 1 million. And what am I saying? When in my presentation I have said that we really have to strengthen our legal framework. We really have to strengthen our institutions and the way we implement our laws. If our laws are too weak, then we have given a safe haven for wildlife traffickers. Because if I commit an offense and I'm just to pay 1,000 naira, and this 1,000 naira was just a fine that was legislated in 1985, you can see that that law, before it was amended, has become obsolete. So the Federal Minister of Environment is in charge of this regulatory framework through the NESRA, which is an agency, a parastatal in Federal Ministry of Environment, and the National Park Service Act also, which is CAP 65, Law of Federation of Nigeria, as amended 2010. We are also playing a role in implementing most of this wildlife trafficking.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Some people wanted to get the question again. The question is, what is the existing framework for collaboration within the agencies in Nigeria? And I believe that, as we know, the Immigration Service is like almost the last outpost for wildlife to get out of Nigeria through departure points, either at the ports or the airport. And of course, there's maybe perhaps limited knowledge that they have. Most of the knowledge may be inland in terms of the parks or the Ministry of Environment, etc. And so I would like to call on Taufik Adedayo Odetunde, who is a Chief Superintendent of Immigration, to share with us the insight as to how they collaborate with other agencies in Nigeria. I'm talking of Immigration Service.
Thank you so much. As you all know, the Nigerian Immigration Service is an agency saddled with the responsibility of border management. And there's a platform for collaboration with other border agencies with the same mandate. As a lead agency, there is the establishment of what we call integrated Border Management Standing Committee, which is under the National Nigeria Migration Policy, which was passed in the year 2015 in Nigeria here. The platform is for constructive dialogue, which has actually enhanced interagency collaboration and effective coordination of all migratory activities in Nigeria. So the platform has actually enabled border agencies with the same mandate to collaborate and for effectiveness in Nigeria. So the issue of movement across our borders, there is always a platform where we interface with each other, and there is an open network between each agency where if the immigration is present in a particular place and the other agencies are not there, what they do is they arrest the situation and report to the appropriate agency for effectiveness, for actual to apprehend the culprit and bring them to book. So it is not like an egocentric era where you say one agency is superior to another. What we actually do is we interface and collaborate with each other in order to achieve the same goal of arresting the traffickers. So that is basically what we do.
Thank you very much. And this will take us to the role of the police in assisting or collaborating with the different agencies. And would like to hear from Selam Amakri, who is of the legal department of the Nigerian police, to tell us how relevant is the police in this whole setup, where it's quite specialized. It's not an everyday crime on the street that they are patrolling, but highly specialized sort of crime. How do they collaborate? How do they detect this crime? And how do they support the entire enforcement process?
Thank you, moderator. You know that the Nigeria Police is practically the first governmental agency that had given birth to other security agencies. And that is why we claim that the Nigeria Police is the lead agency in internal security. We are happy that there are other agencies that are providing internal and external security. And together we are supposed to be collaborating to ensure the security of the whole organism of the country, Nigeria. As always, when the police get information or arrest people that commit crime, we don't do it alone. We normally involve or hand over to the agency that is now empowered to perform that function. And we know, all of us know, the examples are very clear. When the police arrest criminals in the area of drug trafficking, you know that we have the Nigeria Drug Law Enforcement Agency. If we have suspects that are arrested, that are involved in wildlife trafficking, of course we have our agencies, appropriate agencies to hand them over to do the prosecution, while we concentrate practically on crime and criminality. And the police have been encouraging interagency collaboration for years. It's like what the police had been saying in times past was not actually appreciated until now. Probably when it begins to affect other agencies, then they begin to understand what the police have been crying for and advocating for interagency collaboration and relationship. In the past, there is a tendency that you look at organizations, agencies as separate and single. And where you do not perform so well, you become a laughing stock. But the truth is that all the agencies together are supposed to work in collaboration for the success of the country. And no one agency should be perceived as having failed or having succeeded. Where any agency fail, all agencies fail.
Thank you.
Where one agency succeed, all agencies succeed.
Thank you so much. Now, Mr. Adedayo Memudu from the Nigerian Conservation Foundation would like to hear from you the perspective of the NGOs in terms of your impressions of the existence or non-existence of collaboration among the agencies. The second issue I then want you to address is, because there's a question that has come from the audience, that the question is, how relevant are NGOs in terms of being the drivers to keep these government agencies on their toes, and then how are these NGOs recognized, and do they get access to any public funding to ensure that they are doing their job of advocacy to keep all these agencies on their toes, doing the job they are supposed to do? I hope the questions are not too many. Thank you.
Thank you. On the first question, our perspective as non-governmental organization, as well as other civil society organizations, is that we know there are agencies and particularly parastatals saddled with the responsibility of enforcing most of these wildlife crimes. But what we believe is that beyond the establishment of the ministries, agencies, desk officer positions, there must be a coordinated approach in the way we actually tackle these heinous crimes as it relates to wildlife. How do I mean? There must be a national strategy that will guide each and every agency involved, particularly from the community to the top tier level of government. How do I mean? If next year is being handed over certain things, who keeps record of such confiscated items or seizures? We have it on good record and authority that, for example, as it relates to national ivory stockpile management, next year they take charge of the seizures, but the CITES desk is unaware of such. There is no such communication between the two agencies. It's like a rivalry. So that is why we are pushing for a more collaborative, interagency, multi-jurisdictional collaborations to effectively address this. There is a form that seeks to compile information and data on the national ivory stockpile. Nigeria has not been able to effectively utilize this forum to turn in their data for management. And that is why many of the cases go unreported, because we don't have relevant information on that. So there must be, to begin with, in addition to the establishment of all these agencies and ministries, there must be a national action plan on what we are going to be doing with most of these crimes. Those items that are going to be forfeited, what do we do with that? A case in question is Kenya in 2015. Kenya burnt publicly the national ivory seizures they got. We don't even have an inventory for Nigeria's stockpile. We don't know the number we have in stock. We don't know what to do on that. We are yet to agree on that. So there must be a coordinated approach in this wise. And also to question number 2, NGOs are very relevant as a critical stakeholder. We know NGO complement what government agencies do, and are mostly in areas where governments don't have presence. We work with the communities directly. We work for the establishment of community-based organizations, and we come under different umbrellas based on each NGO's mandate or areas of operation. So when we are talking about a national strategy to combat this, everybody must be involved. NGOs, local communities, enforcement agencies, and the national regulatory agencies. We're happy that the Endangered Species Act has been signed into law after being amended in 2016, but we must go beyond that. Do the enforcement agencies have the required skill and knowledge to know everything contained on Appendix 1, Appendix 2, those that are legally allowed to be traded in, and those that are unlawful for people to trade in? All this must come together for us to be able to move forward. And that is why there must be a national stakeholders summit on this for purposes of education, collaboration, and better coordination of our national strategies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, I gave you 2 questions, but you answered 3 questions. Because one of the questions that a participant sent to me is that they want to know what constitutes illegal wildlife trafficking. In other words, the exact actions that constitute illegal wildlife trafficking. And you explained that under the new law, they have Appendix 1, they have Appendix 2, and that some of these things have actually been specified, that you would know what exactly is illegal and what is legal. So I take it that also answers that question. But from what has been said so far, it's apparent that, for instance, the police, if they arrest somebody, they just hand over to the next agency. And a lot of talk about existence of some platform, you know. I would like to invite Mary Ellen to sort of give some advice on, you know, what you think or how you think they can improve. Because it's one thing to talk about having a platform, it's one thing to talk about passing over the job to the next agency. Is that really collaboration? Is that, are they meeting bi-weekly? What should they do? Is it talking about action plan? Is it all about planning and then another document and it's thrown somewhere and everybody says we have platform? What are the practical steps, lessons, things they can do actually to achieve collaboration, not to talk about collaboration?
Thank you very much for that question. What I have found to be successful is being in the same room with each other and talking about what is occurring. You get to know the individuals that you're dealing with. So for me, we deal with state agencies and local agencies, so the federal government is kind of foreign to us. But when you sit down and you talk to that FBI agent and you find out that you're on the same page, it makes things easier. One thing that we did with the task force is we came up with a mission statement, and we said out loud and in print, and everybody agreed to it, this is our mission, this is what we're going to do. And along the way there have been complaints from different departments that maybe we should be doing this, that, or the next thing. And we go back to the mission statement that everyone who participates agreed upon. And getting contacts between agencies works, it's helpful, and also being co-located. When we're lucky, we're obviously a small or much smaller jurisdiction than any of your states, but when you can walk down the hallway and talk to another person and say, I have this case, I think maybe it involves your jurisdiction as well. You are able to handle the case much better. It's not just on paper. Of course, email helps when everybody's out of the office. And making the decision not to stick with jurisdictional lines. We still have the tension between what gets investigated federally and prosecuted federally and what gets investigated state and prosecuted by me. And I think that tension will always be there, but the more we speak together, the better it works.
Thank you so much. Marisa, do you have anything to add there?
I do.
Sure.
Thank you for that follow-up question. So from a practical standpoint, the community decides what the issue is. So in this case, it's wildlife trafficking. And if the heads of the important departments, including investigation and the parks and the prosecutors, they've decided that this is the issue they're going to tackle, what you do is, what we've done in the past is they create a joint task force. And there is a memorandum of understanding that is agreed to by the heads of the agencies that they sign off on. And as part of that, they will dedicate an individual or more, depending on what the resource need is, to the task force. They are assigned to the task force. And so you will have people from the different agencies working together, often in the same space. That's how the ICAC task force works. They belong to different departments, but they work in the same office. And so because of that, there is a level of dedication, but there's also accountability. Because the heads of each of the departments then, in order to make sure that their employee is, that resource is well spent, we all track the numbers. And we say, okay, how many cases are being prosecuted or investigated? And so there's accountability in the numbers, because multiple heads of different agencies are looking at the task force to see if it's viable. And because of that signed memorandum, there is that also that dedication to it that I think lends itself to more effectiveness. Certainly we can talk to other agencies, but until they're invested in that task force, there's not that much accountability otherwise.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Now, one of the biggest problems in Nigeria is anything that is interministerial or interagency. They are extremely protective of jurisdiction. Please, this is please. Immigration, this is immigration. And they are very jurisdictionally jealous, let me put it that way. Jesus, what's the experience? What's your own experience in terms of dealing with, interagency competition for jurisdiction or protection of jurisdiction?
Well, I think in this situation, there is a common goal and a very noble one, and that is the protection of wildlife. Institutional jealousy, which is what we're talking about, is, I think, an impediment to reaching the appropriate goals. I believe, as Mary Ellen indicated, if there is a mission statement and there are people within the individual organizations who are going to make their objective, their mission, to make sure that the protection of wildlife and the conservation of wildlife is the ultimate goal, those individuals are charged with a special duty of collaborating. This is not something that we can replenish. This is not something that once it's gone, it's gone. It's like time. Once you use it, it's no longer going to come back. So individuals have egos. On a cause like this, those should be set aside so that the function of the different institutions that we see here and others internationally, globally, are put together in the same framework for the same objective.
Thank you so much. Now, I just wanted to ask one final question on this issue, because before we go down, there are a couple of judges we have here. They want to make a contribution. What is your experience with co-location? I know that in the ports you have co-location, but is there any additional experiences that we have in Nigeria in terms of co-location of agencies in order to tackle wide? What's the experience that we have? Or do you offices on from one agency to the other? Do you actually
Thank you so much. Let me take the issue about the one-stop government, which the federal government of Nigeria is practicing now under the ease of doing business. Because the work at the, let's look at the airport, for instance, now, when you come in, you meet the Nigerian Immigration Service, and on profiling the passport or anything, or profiling the passenger coming into the country, it is discovered that there is an issue that has to do with another agency. There is something we call referral system. That person is referred, the case is referred to the appropriate agency for adequate addressing.
Okay, thank you. Amatu, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to add to what the facilitator said when she pointed out that one way of ensuring collaboration is to get a task force in one room. I wanted to say that the Nigeria police have been doing that over the years. And it had taken the shape of being ad hoc. But I discovered in recent time that the present Inspector General of Police, IGP Ibrahim Kutu Edris, has gone a step further by trying to build complex for what they refer to as a task force building, where even if it is ad hoc, you will have different agencies working in that building to achieve a particular purpose. In addition, the Inspector General has been building another complex they call the database complex. Excuse me. The idea being that that complex will have a lot of data that would or could be shared with other relevant agencies to ensure that particularly information that will be useful to a particular agency is made available to that agency so that they can use it to work with. And being involved together, because we have been preaching collaboration, interagency relationship, cooperation, we expect, just as we have been campaigning for information from the community, we expect that that will further enhance the cooperation and relationship between the agencies.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to add to that, that under the new Administration of Criminal Justice Act, there's a provision that every suspect, they should take the fingerprint and the DNA, and then a report should be made to the attorney. So, well, what is not clear is who will keep the database. Is it the Attorney General or is it the police that will keep the database, or there will be two databases, you know. But that issue is there. There are some interesting questions that I have here. One says, what is the relationship between parks and zoos? Are they the same? You want to take that? What's the relationship between parks and zoos?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. Parks, like I've already said, we manage the resources in their natural habitat. And zoos are those that we can say they are ex situ managed.
Artificial.
Yeah. So we have in situ conservation, we have ex situ conservation. So parks falls in ex situ.
Okay, thank you.
Managing outside their natural habitat. Just in a summary.
Thank you. There's another interesting question from a student. We have a student here with a question for Marisa. A student has a question. A student from the Faculty of Law, University of Calabar, has a question for you. And the question says that in prosecuting sexual abuse cases all through your career, how have you grappled with the problem of out-of-court settlement? Since many rich abusers have good defense attorneys that can write fat checks and make cases go away.
There we go. Thank you for that question. We fortunately don't have that situation because the attorneys cannot write a check to settle a crime like that. There are some crimes that are, minor crimes that you can settle out of court for money, but that's more like theft or something like that. These are very serious cases, and we don't allow that. The other concept is that the victims don't bring charges against the defendants. I do. The district attorney's office does. The people of the state of California are the ones that choose the charges. So even if a victim is reluctant to prosecute or doesn't really want to go forward, that's my decision, and it takes the weight off of their shoulders, frankly, but it's not an impact for us. It is an impact, though. The financial complication goes into the idea that these children don't report being abused because the abusers are often the ones that write the checks in the home, that pay the bills, that pay for school, that put food on the table. So that's a hurdle that we have to come across by understanding that, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys is sexually assaulted as a child in our country. But very few of them actually report it. So that's why when these agencies work together, like the schools and social services, and they see things that are red flags based on their training in child abuse, then we can further investigate. So that's where the money is a barrier to investigation, but thankfully not to prosecution.
Thank you very much. And when she was making her presentation, she gave at least 2 or 3 examples where she got conviction without the victim giving evidence. So they never depended on the victim going into the witness box in order to prosecute the case. So even if you settle the victim, they will still prosecute the case. Now, before I call on the acting chief judge of Abia State, Honorable Justice Onoha Ogwe, to make a short remark, there's a very interesting question here that I would like the panel to tackle. The question says that wildlife includes the forest, the fauna, special trees and animals, etc. And that the local communities live off this and have been living off them for millions of years in a sort of balance with the resources without necessarily depleting it. And the question is, so these local people, local dwellers, if they stay away from this forest, what are those initiatives that would enable them to still sustain their livelihood and avoid illegality?
Okay. For that particular question, we are not saying we should preserve all these wild animals, wild plants, wild habitats at the expense of human beings. what we do is now participatory for people. It must be for the benefits of the local people who have not only cultural but socio-economic relationships with all these natural resources wherever they occur. We now encourage provision of livelihood alternatives by training them, empowering them on income-generating activities that will reduce their dependence on the use of wild plants, wild animals, while not forgetting that population continues to increase. Even for in areas where you recognize their rights, before such places are set aside for protection. I mean the legal enclaves, those ones that law recognizes. As the population continues to increase, they move the boundaries away to give them more lands. That is why we must incorporate land use planning into our developments. We must also incorporate development of income generating activities, that is alternatives, to boost local livelihoods, because you don't want them to suffer. You don't want to create social problems. You are not taking them away from the natural resources completely, but to manage them in ways as to sustainably allow those things to continue to be where they are. And that is why most of these interventions nowadays now come with livelihood packages, income generating schemes. You can organize them into user groups, those that are dependent on the communities, in forest edge communities, to make them dependent less on these wild plants, wild animals, and wild lands wherever they occur. So that is it. We are not taking them away.
Thank you. Madam.
Actually, I thought that was directed at Margas. I was beckoning on him. I can help him. My name is Evangelist Caroline Olori, the conservator of Cross River National Park, and in fact the first female conservator in Nigeria, even in West Africa. If you see, I wrote a note there to you, so that question kind of triggered what I had in mind when the chief judge of the state was giving us about using wildlife. So when that question came up, I wanted to use that opportunity that wildlife was given for man, but man was supposed to utilize it in a conservative way. So the problem we are having in communities is that the utilization is not conservative, and so most of the wildlife we had before, in fact some are extinct. They keep moving from abundance to being rare, to being threatened, and they finally become extinct because of the rate of usage. I'm from Cross River. All we grew up to see leopard skin adorning every home where you have a warrior. But right now, I tell you, that species is extinct. That's to tell you how abundant the local ekpe, any ekpe person you go, you see the leopard skin. And that is because the utilization was not checked. And it's happening in all our communities. Why did I come up with this? Part of the recommendation from NCFC was the drivers of wildlife trafficking, poor perception. And that's what I get from almost all of us. The perception that it cannot finish. The animals were meant for us to keep eating. So nobody looks at it when you're talking about protecting wildlife. And that is where it has to change from all of us that are here. Because if we still have that perception that it is meant for food so we can eat it, nobody has to be checked. It is one of the major drivers of wildlife trafficking. And he also has mentioned, and in National Park Service, there's this Sustainable Support Zone Development Program where it is encouraged. You can go ahead with your agriculture, but let it be the agriculture that you can utilize a small area and have a greater yield. That is what we're exploring with other government organizations. And then we have domestication, because the chief judge mentioned protein. I just want us to give us this information. There is the domestication, whether in plants. Right now, I went to some place in Akwa Ibom. They have wonderful place where they have their afang, which is a delicacy. Domestication of this wildlife species has encouraged not relying on the wildlife in the wild. And then this like the national parks, they serve as natural laboratory. Most of our visitors come from the universities. Now, all the things they are taught in the classroom, unless they come to the park, which is protected, because we have considered that we need to protect this area, they come to see them in the wild. I want to use this opportunity to use this forum to tell us that we all need to work together to preach the message of conservation, which says utilizing what you have, such that while it's serving the current generation, it still has the potential to serve future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank you very much. Before I call on His Lordship to speak, I just want to share my own experience from Canada. You know, we talk a lot in the air about conservation, but you know, you have to make it very practical, and you really have to balance the issues. And one of the things they do in Canada is they recognize that local communities have live off the forest and need some sustenance, and they try to get a balance by deciding that, okay, you need X number of fish or X number of this particular animal a year, and you are given a license for that, and they control how many you can actually take in a month. All right, so you can go to the wild and take based on your license, and the presumption is that if you take more than what your license provides, you are no longer taking for you to eat, you want to trade, and it's the trade that they ban, you know. Again, because there's a lot of education, so people are educated, they understand these issues, and that way they can achieve a balance between the environment and the people taking sustainably, you know, etc. In fact, I have a friend whose family into this business that involves essentially exploiting the forest and getting the trees, making them into little lumps that are used to generate electricity. So essentially what they do is they cut up the tree, cut it into little lumps like this, truck it to a power station. So instead of using diesel to power the furnace that then generates the electricity, or produces the power that you know, they throw, you know how they used to throw coal into the steam engine, right? They throw this wood into the furnace to generate the electricity. And so he discussed with me and said, you know, could we do that business in Nigeria? And I spoke to the chairman of the I don't know whether I still the chairman of the National Conservation Foundation, and he said, oh, there's no forest in Nigeria, you can't do it anymore. There's no forest that can do that business now. But the problem they have in Canada is that they've so conserved the forest that they need to exploit it about 20% every year. Otherwise the forest can if it's not exploited, it would I don't know, like it would it will now go into a reverse. There's something that happens. So you actually need to be taking things out of the forest for it to keep regenerating, you know. So they are way below their mark, and so they allow this business to go on in Canada, because for every tree you take out, you have to plant, I think, 2 or 3 for every one you take out. And so you have this sustainable balance that they try to achieve with their forest. I will now call on His Lordship to make a few remarks.
The moderator, sir, let me say first of all that this is my first exposure to CWAG, and I think I've benefited immensely from this symposium. I thank you for inviting me. You are doing a great job, but my observation is that there's a missing link, and that's a political link. If you look at what we are discussing, there are issues of policy. And I see that the only representation here is a professional in politics. That's the Attorney General, who is a professional in politics. And most of the Attorneys General are accidental politicians, in that, having been brought into government, many of them don't have the courage to advise properly on issues. Okay, look at, we are doing this type of thing in Calabar, which has rich forest resources, and which is also a target of wildlife trafficking. What's the level of political participation? It's not important to those in government. The legislature is not here. The executive, the deputy was represented by somebody. Environmental issues are not important to those in authority. That's why we are abusing the environment. Look at what has happened to our forests. Depletion, you cut down, you don't replant. Environmental issues are not campaign issues. They are not interested. So what can your organization do to get political involvement? All these gentlemen here who have spoken very well are under orders from above, even to investigate. If political interests are involved, others will come abroad, stop investigation, they will stop. They remain under authority. They are not in policy, they are in execution. Where are the policy makers? They are not here. How do you get them involved? So that they can know that these issues are central to our survival. The environment is important, the forests, the reserves are important to sustain human life. So you may have to find a way of getting the policymakers, the politicians, involved in your work, so that when you make recommendations, they'll be able to implement them. Then permit me to say something on the child abuse issue, since it's also one of your core areas. I noticed that currently there is, I don't know whether it's deliberate, in social conversations, obliterating the difference between defilement and rape. You read about 8-year-old girl raped by a 60-year-old. In those days, we were taught that that would have been defilement. Because when you talk about rape, it implies consent. A child is incapable of giving consent. So, and when it comes to trial, I suggest that the onus, the standard of proof in defilement cases should be should be balance of probabilities and not prove beyond reasonable doubt. Because if a 10-year-old can boldly come out to give evidence about an adult who is alleged to have defied her, the court should consider the probability of such act having taken place. And if it is probable that the man did it, the man should be convicted. And lastly on that, I encourage adults to teach our children the names of their body parts. I am involved in trials. There's a current one I'm handling. The little girl of 12 years was defied. And giving evidence, the girl is unable to say the part of her that was penetrated. She said, my body, my waist. We kept on prompting her. What? I asked her, does it mean your mother didn't tell you? The organ you use in urinating, what is called, said the mother. And the mother was the first witness. She didn't tell her. So, and you know, traditionally, we are afraid to tell our children the names of the male organ, the female organ. And when they come in court, they are unable to say. And if they are unable to prove where the penetration took place, the case will fail. And I feel pained when I meet such cases. That happened before. The girl insisted that man penetrated her bottom. They tried everything to get her to, that was her evidence throughout. And the defense counsel capitalized on it. And the man was let off. So these are the areas we should contribute on our own part. And finally, on Mr. Adedayo's paper, he talked about education, prevention, and prosecution. I think those are the areas we should, on our own level, we should concentrate on those areas. There should be more education. Like these things are not in our consciousness. We should bring them. The NOA is there, then the NGOs should contribute in letting people know education, then prevention and prosecution at a level. If we can deal with the primary source of this trafficking, the markets that supply them, by getting the locals involved and emphasizing the federal thing. I don't know Abuja can protect animal. Okay. Let the states be involved and the local governments and traditional rulers, and we ensure that we prosecute, educate them why they should not be involved, and those who are involved, they are punished for getting involved. It will reduce the source of the international markets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll make a few random comments. We heard about how investigators and prosecutors collaborate in the US to get things done. Our experience here is that sometimes a prosecutor goes to court and has never known the witness he's going to call. So now that all of us are here, we have heard how some other people are doing. I hope we are learning. A state counsel will come to you in the morning in court and say the witnesses are not here. She doesn't even know the witnesses. So if the police don't bring the witnesses, the case is gone. Then I want to start by, I want to ask all of us to start this process. When we leave here, or even from here now, let us ask ourselves. The first question is, do we like where we are regarding this wildlife thing we're saying? If we say no, the next question we should ask ourselves is, do we want to improve? If we say yes, then the next thing I would advise us to do is don't pass the buck, do something. And it is government is not from the moon. It is we here who are government. There are 4 agencies here. Start the process of collaborating. 4 of you, start. Before you leave here, take a date for your first meeting. Until you start, it will not be done. Policy has to be done by us, human beings. Our fathers did and died. It is our time to run this Nigeria and this state now. There is no need passing the buck. I say it everywhere I have the opportunity to say so. Complainants, we don't change things by complaining. We change things by taking action. Take action. Don't mind where we are now. Start the first step. You don't know where it can take us. As you go, you expand. As you go, you expand. The policy will come. Until you start, there will be no policy. And even if they bring policy, like from my experience, there are so many good things that we don't enforce. That is not the fault of policy. It's the fault of we. The will to implement our laws. Because we don't implement our laws, that's why we are where we are now. They say what is sufficient for the wise. Thank you. If we want to improve, act. Stop complaining. Thank you.
We are almost running out of time. I think a very important issue has been raised around policy, influence on policy, etc. The point is well noted. Just to let everybody know that CWAG actually considered that issue. And I had to decide at what level did it want to engage with the system. Did it want to engage with politicians and try and change policy, or did it engage with those on the ground who can effect change? And the distinction is that there's too many policies. However, the power actually belongs to rule of law. And when you talk about rule of law, you talk about the law officers. In America, there was a time America was in the grip of the mob. The mob held America by the neck. And there was no policy in Washington that changed it. It was the attorney generals, the district officers, with the police, the FBI. They decided to go after the mob. They didn't change any law. In fact, when they tried to use the law, it didn't work. So they looked for easy things. What they were committing were murder and the rest. But what they used to get them out of the system were wire crimes, telephone wire crimes, tax, and things like that. So the law officers in America changed the system. You here can change Nigeria. You can change the system. If you depend on those people in Abuja, we will remain where we are. We may even go backwards. That's why we are talking to the law officers, the judges. The law officers are the ones that will change Nigeria. The enforcing agencies are the ones. Just do your work, do it well, bring the prosecution, hope everybody on the chain does their work. Eventually, we will eliminate the culture of impunity and we will reestablish rule of law in Nigeria. But no politician will establish rule of law for you. It is we that will do it. We believe you are very important. That is why we are talking to you. Let them remain in Abuja. If we do the work very well, they have to work well in Abuja. Simple. May I just call on the representative of the Director General of the National Orientation Agency to speak to us for 2 minutes. Yeah.
Incidentally, my DG, because of exigency of duty, could not come, and he renders his apology. I want some few suggestions. Are very enlightened these days. A program like I would suggest that they should get at least few of the traditional people to be involved. A youth, a woman leader, and a traditional chief. That is one. Now we are sitting in this ivory tower and talking. I want to ask a few questions, sir, please, with all apologies, and because I like to learn. I work with the grassroots. Among all of us in the high table and all of us sitting here, let us lift our hands, those who have been to the wildlife and with their families. Because it's one thing for us to sit and talk. It's not saying I go there for official duty. That you intentionally sit down in your house and say, I am taking my family on holidays or this. But if we talk of abroad, people go. Why I'm saying this is that the local people also need to see how you value that forest, so that they will also place value on that forest. What gives Israel and other countries money is tourism. And if you go to the locals, you are talking, they go to the forest. If they have to fry akara and sell to tourists, they won't be in the forest. If they hunt, even the men know that they have to do something to sell to a tourist, they will not be in the forest hunting it. And then another issue is that those people we are talking, granted, we are saying I know this thing. I'm a grassroots mobilizer, and I can tell you all the areas, especially in Cross River State. We are saying we have empowered them this. Of what magnitude? It's not one, because it's like the entire Boki axis. If you go to Kwango, maybe you went there, and another 2-3 communities, and say you have empowered them, you have not done much. Because the entire Boki axis, they are there, depending on that place. So you need to do more to empower the people there, to take the attraction from that place. And then, we have to know that those people haven't given their land. They are endangered somehow. And their children who manage to go to school from there to compete with ivory tower children, bourgeois children. Their children go to public schools. They don't have money to go to nursery and international nurseries. So they have to come and compete with our children who are bourgeois. When they manage to finish and compete favorably, they go back, they have no jobs. And they are young. They will go back to that place and do better than their aging parents. So in job employment, these things should be looked at. In giving grants and loans, people will wear agbada and wear suits and go to the banks and collect grants and loans. But those people don't have access to it. They should be given grants to establish little things, not necessarily loans. They should be given grants and properly monitored and supervised. And I want to say that National Orientation Agency has succeeded in making the federal government to bring back civic education, which is taught in secondary and primary school, and are almost making it compulsory in the higher tertiary institutions. I think that this body can also look at the scheme of civic education and see how they can start to entrench the ideas we are bringing here on this conservation there. Then we also have to do a great enlightenment. It's not one time enlightenment in that place needs to be sustained. And National Orientation Agency should be looked into. It's one thing that beats my imagination is that National Orientation Agency is a big agency that can change this country in a twinkling of an eye, but we don't seem to give much importance to it. The government alone cannot do. And sometimes with other people, like you, Samsa, you need to get the government, even when in budgeting, to know the importance of this office. Because if you have good budget, most of these things can be carried out and done. And I want to say finally, finally, we have been involved in child trafficking. And I appreciate what the ladies, you can see, it is the ladies who are interested more in these sexual issues and molestation and defilement. I'm grateful to our other justice and judiciary people who are also interested. But the social welfare, I'm sorry I have this fact because I work on them and I can talk more than this, but because of time, so I'm sorry. Now, the social welfare department needs to be empowered because like what in there, if a child is defiled, you could take this child, I'm sure, you could take the child from the parents and the child will be properly sponsored and catered for elsewhere. But here, if the father or anybody is a close relative is defiling a child, where will the child go to? The child thinks first, who will sponsor the child, who will feed the child, and all that. So that's why I'm calling for the strengthening of the social welfare department, for the government to see what they can do, so that when these cases come up, the child could be taken away from there, and you know, the child will be now properly protected. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I think it's all work in progress. A lot of the suggestions that have been made, we will try our best to find a way to make sure that the output of workshops like this get to the politicians. But we don't need to necessarily be speaking with them, but we will speak with them in another forum because it's so difficult to bring them here. But the point is noted that we need to engage with them, but it's another level of the strategy. The other point I want to make is that hopefully in terms of prosecution, there will be changes with the new criminal Administration of Criminal Justice Act requiring DNA and fingerprint to be taken. most of these defilement cases can be decided on scientific evidence. So you don't actually need the victim to say anything, because the doctor will give evidence of where they extracted the, say, the semen, the DNA of the other person from, and then it will be, the burden will be on that person to prove how the thing got there. I mean, you don't even need the child to give evidence. So, I mean, these are issues that needs to be resolved. How you can deal with these cases without necessarily the victim being involved. And I think there's more work that needs to go. I think tomorrow we are having a more specialized training on administration of criminal justice and prosecution, so that, you know, the techniques will be taught on how the prosecutor can actually prove his case even when the victim is not going to be available. So we'll just round up by going round. Just last shot, we start from Jesus, and then it goes round. Everybody will give us 1 minute of their last thoughts on what we have discussed so far.
The gist of most of the speakers and the folks that spoke from the audience is that not only is collaboration important, but there has to be a movement that cannot wait, and that is not wait for the politicians. The organizations that are already in place can, in fact, make that change. From the perspective of the American system, that is sometimes how it works. Tony gave a very good example of how the federal government went after the mob with their racketeering laws, but they didn't wait for that to be in place. They used it once it was in place. But that was a reaction after the fact, after that the federal agencies and police and FBI did that. It is the same concept here, that people who are interested, and all of you are obviously here for that reason, can effect that change today. And I think it's very important. I mean, I see the passion in the speakers. I see the will in the people that run these organizations. Why not start today? Thank you.
I agree with everything that Mr. Romero said. And just so you all know, I'm a prosecutor and he's a defense attorney. And we have worked together on opposite sides of the courtroom on cases. And we work well together. And if you're worried about people's egos and all of those things that come into play, please understand that we can do this together even though our jobs are technically opposed to each other. But when you work together, you achieve the right thing, the common goal. And so once you figure out what that goal is, as long as everyone is dedicated to the same goal, everyone's ego will be satisfied because you will be successful and you will do it better together. And that's what I would leave you with. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues as well. Deciding on what's important and deciding to do it is a big step. It's more effective when it's the bottom up rather than having the politicians and just the highest say this is what you must do. When you have a group of dedicated people like I've seen here today working together without their egos and moving forward, that's how you tackle a crime. That's how you have a sea change in the perspective of the people and the perspective of the criminals. When agencies, prosecutors fight with police or with other agencies, the criminals win. They're able to exploit all of that. But by working together, you can combat any crime that you decide to do, and we are all stronger together.
Thank you very much. I think what we can deduce from today's symposium is that our take home is that we just have to work as a team. And if we work as a team, we are going to have collective success. for us, the agencies that are implementing some of these laws, I want to say that we should further enhance our collaboration. I know that for us in the National Park Service, our act actually empowers us to arrest and prosecute. But if a case comes up that we need the assistance of other assistance agencies like the police, they should not hesitate to actually work with us. I also want to confirm that we have been having tremendous cooperation from the police, and we want to solicit that they continue to also support us. And for the immigration service, the borders, like I said, are a little bit porous in case of wildlife trafficking. But the take home, I will tell my bosses that we just have to do a little bit more further to see if we can actually post our staff to most of these critical border areas. By doing so, I think we also help to see how this to bring reduction in the wildlife crime. Thank you very much.
I commend the organizers of today's event for providing the platform for us to interact and look at how to better combat the menace of illegal trafficking, not only in Nigeria but on the continent, and as well contribute to global action in this regard. I also want to urge the organizers as well to look at maybe sponsoring more of these events on a regular basis. Not only that, even if all the agencies saddled with the primary roles of enforcing all these laws with a view to tackling the crimes agree to work together, there must be a platform for them to come together. Coupled with that, there must be a national strategy that will be coordinated on an integrated basis, and also we all know that we need to develop our capacities and take the advocacy more to the grassroots. The community people, the traditional rulers, the Hunters Association, and people involved at every stage of this wildlife trafficking must be brought on board. And you know, getting funds to bring everybody together is